When Dr. Alistair Finch opened that anonymous email, he expected another hoax about medieval folklore. Instead, he found a photograph that shattered everything he believed about reality. A child's face peering from behind a tree, skin tinged with an impossible green hue. The same condition he'd just dismissed as ancient malnutrition was staring back at him through a modern camera lens. Some legends, he would learn, aren't stories at all. They're warnings from the living. The lecture hall was warm, filled with the soft scent of old paper and the gentle hum of a projector. Behind Dr. Alistair Finch, a crude 12th century illustration glowed on the screen, two children, their forms stiff and unnaturally coloured, standing beside a wolf pit. Alistair, comfortable in his tweed jacket and the familiar cadence of his own voice, moved through the legend with the precision of a surgeon. "The tale of the Green Children of Woolpit," he began, his tone patient, authoritative, "is one of our most enduring local myths. As chronicled by Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh, two children, a brother and sister, appeared in the village of Woolpit in Suffolk. Their skin was green. They spoke an unknown language, and they would eat only raw broad beans." He paused, letting the strangeness of it hang in the air for a moment before neatly dispelling it. "It's a fantastic story. It speaks to our fear of the other, our love of the inexplicable. But folklore is not a record of impossible events. It is a mirror reflecting the anxieties and realities of the time. The truth, as is so often the case, is likely far more mundane." He gestured to the screen. "The most probable explanation is that these were not visitors from another dimension, but lost children of Flemish immigrants. Persecution under King Henry II was rampant. Imagine two orphaned children, speaking only Flemish, wandering out of a forest, traumatized and confused. To the isolated villagers of Suffolk, their language would be gibberish." He clicked a remote, and a medical diagram showing the effects of severe malnutrition appeared, and the green skin, not magical, but medical. Hyperchromic anemia, or as it was once known, chlorosis. A severe iron deficiency, often brought on by a malnourished diet, can result in a noticeable greenish pallor of the skin. They would eat only beans, the story says, because it was likely the only food they recognized. Lost, starving and sick, they stumbled into English history and became a legend. Alistair smiled, a neat, tidy conclusion. He saw the story as a case closed, a fascinating psychological artifact to be catalogued and understood. He saw the world as a series of such cases, complex puzzles that would always, eventually, yield to logic and evidence. That evening, the confidence of the lecture hall felt a world away. Alistair's office was his sanctuary, a den of controlled chaos where every book had a purpose and every artifact told a story he already understood. He sat before his computer, the glow of the screen illuminating towers of paper, sipping a cup of rapidly cooling Earl Grey tea. He was scrolling through a niche historical society forum, a dry but satisfying corner of the internet, when a small notification popped up in the corner of his screen. It was an email from an address that was nothing more than a random string of letters and numbers passed through an encryption service. The subject line was a single, stark word: Woolpit. He felt a prickle of curiosity. Fan mail was common after a public lecture, but rarely so cryptic. He opened it. There was no greeting, no sign-off. The body of the email contained only 3 words, hanging in the white space like an accusation. They never left. Below the text was a single attachment. He clicked it. The image that loaded was not a medieval illustration. It was a photograph, clearly taken with a modern phone camera, slightly blurry as if captured in a hurry. It showed a forest scene, dappled with sunlight. Peeking from behind the rough bark of an oak tree was the face of a young girl, perhaps 10 years old. Her hair was a tangled mess of brown, and her eyes were wide with what looked like fear. but it was her skin that made Alistair's breath catch in his throat. It was pale, almost translucent, but imbued with a faint, sickly, and utterly unmistakable greenish hue. It wasn't paint. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was the color of her skin. It was the chlorosis from his lecture, not as a historical symptom, but as a living reality, staring back at him through the screen. Hours bled into one another. The tea went cold. The moon traced its slow arc across the sky outside his window. Alistair's office grew dark, the world shrinking to the insistent glow of his monitor. He had abandoned the forum, abandoned everything, his mind consumed by the impossible photograph. He ran it through every reverse image search he could find, every facial recognition software the university subscribed to. The result was always the same. Nothing. No matches. The girl in the photo, as far as the digital world was concerned, did not exist. His rational mind fought for purchase. It was a hoax, a clever digital manipulation designed to fool the local folklorist. But the image felt too real. The fear in the girl's eyes, the way the light caught the strange pigment of her skin, it lacked the artificial smoothness of a forgery. Frustrated, he pivoted. If he couldn't trace the image, perhaps he could trace the symptom. He left the world of folklore websites and dove into the cold, clinical depths of medical archives and scientific journals. He searched for modern cases of chlorosis, for iron deficiencies, for any recorded anomaly that might explain what he saw. For hours, he found nothing but historical papers and textbook entries. Then he got a hit. It was obscure, buried in the records of a 2011 symposium on genetic disorders. It wasn't the paper itself, but a reference in another bibliography. The title made the hairs on his arms stand up. A familial aggregation of chronic chlorosis with unique protein markers in a geographically isolated Suffolk cohort. Familial, chronic, Suffolk. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He searched the journal's digital archives for that year, that issue. He found the table of contents. The title was listed. But when he clicked the link to access the PDF, a new page loaded with a single, sterile line of text. Article retracted by publisher. He tried other databases, academic backchannels, archives of retracted papers. It was gone. Not just retracted, but scrubbed. Wiped clean from the internet's memory with a surgical precision that bespoke immense effort. All that remained was the ghost of its title, a signpost pointing to a road that had been deliberately and completely erased. Alistair leaned back in his chair, the office now feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. The girl in the photo was real. The condition was real. And someone, somewhere, had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure no one ever knew. The neat, tidy case he had closed just that afternoon had been violently pried open. And now, staring into the darkness, Alistair realized he was looking at the edges of a truth far more terrifying than any medieval legend. The ghost of that retracted paper was a hook Alistair couldn't shake. It was one thing to debunk a centuries-old legend in the sterile comfort of a lecture hall. It was another entirely to be confronted with evidence of a modern conspiracy actively suppressing a scientific truth. And so, 2 days later, his sensible sedan, a vessel of academic respectability, looked entirely alien, parked on the main street of Woolpit. The village was exactly as the tourist pamphlets described, a jewel of Suffolk, with timber-framed houses leaning into one another and roses climbing lazily over flint walls. It was a place preserved in amber, beautiful and suffocating. The unnerving quiet was the first thing he noticed. It wasn't peace. It was a held breath. He stepped into a pub called the Green Man, the irony not lost on him. The low-level chatter of the half-dozen patrons ceased the moment the door creaked shut behind him. Every eye was on him, just for a second, before turning away with practiced indifference. He ordered a sandwich and a pint from a barman whose smile was a tight, weary line. "Just visiting?" the barman asked, wiping an already clean glass. "Working, actually," Alistair replied, trying to sound casual. "I'm a folklorist, researching the Green Children." The chill was immediate and palpable. A man in the corner lowered his newspaper. The barman's smile vanished completely. "Not much to research," he said, his voice flat. "It's a story for tourists. You'll find what you need in the gift shop." Another man chimed in, not looking at Alistair but at his pint. "Best leave the old stories alone. They're just stories." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a collective, quietly delivered warning. The air was thick with unspoken rules. Alistair finished his lunch in near silence, the feeling of being watched crawling over his skin. He was an outsider, a foreign body the village was already trying to reject. The chill followed him to the village church. It was a cold, damp building that smelled of stone dust and decaying hymn books. In a small back room, the parish records were kept. The vicar, a young nervous man named Father Michael, had granted him access, but he now hovered nearby, tidying shelves and sorting papers in a flurry of unproductive activity. He was a friendly but anxious warden. Alistair, in his element, set to work. He was a scholar, and this was his trade. With gentle hands, he turned the brittle, parchment-like pages of the registers, his eyes scanning the elegant, spidery script of vicars long dead. He began to trace family lines, cross-referencing births and deaths, building a demographic map in his mind. And soon, he found the anomalies. Certain families, clustered in the parish's outlying areas, suffered from suspiciously high rates of infant mortality. For centuries, the records were meticulous. Then, around the mid-20th century, they changed. The detailed handwritten entries were replaced by standardized, less informative death certificates. The patterns became harder to follow, the lines of inquiry dissolving into bureaucratic fog. And one name kept appearing, intertwined with these families for generations, sometimes as landowners, sometimes as witnesses, sometimes as benefactors in wills. A strange, almost corporate-sounding name for a Suffolk family, Veridian. He noted it down, a peculiar thread in a tapestry of sorrow. As dusk began to settle, painting the village green in hues of orange and purple, Alistair left the church, his mind buzzing with fragmented data. A woman was waiting for him on the path, sitting on a wooden bench as if she knew his exact time of departure. She was in her 70s, with eyes as sharp and clear as winter frost. "You're Dr. Finch," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Alara. I was the village nurse for 40 years. Alistair, surprised, admitted that he was. "I saw you at the pub," she continued, her voice low and steady. "You're asking questions people here don't have answers for. Not for outsiders, anyway." She patted the bench, and Alistair sat. "My grandmother used to tell me stories. Not the ones for the tourists, the real ones. She called them the Veridian kin, the Fey-touched, families who carried the green sickness. She said the old landowning family, the de Calne, always took care of them, gave them homes, food, medicine in exchange for being kept apart. In exchange for their silence." Alistair stared at her. The name she'd mentioned, de Calne, one he recognized from the deepest recesses of the archives. "The Veridian families," he repeated, the name from the parish records suddenly feeling heavier. Alara gave a single, sharp nod. "You're a man who trusts books and records, but some histories aren't written down, they're whispered, and maybe they should stay that way." She stood up, her joints creaking softly. "Be careful, Doctor. Some stories bite back." She gave him a hard, pitying look. "If you really want to see what happens to people who dig too deep, go have a look at the old Miller cottage. It's down the unlit road, past the old oak. But I'm telling you, you should just get in your car and go home." Her warning was a dare. An hour later, Alistair was driving down that very road. The narrow lane was a tunnel carved through thick, ancient woods, and his headlights barely pierced the oppressive darkness. He found the cottage just as Alara had described, a skeletal ruin set far back from the road, slowly collapsing into the earth. He pushed open the groaning door and stepped inside, the beam of his phone's flashlight cutting through the gloom. The place was a squatter-esque nest of filth and decay, but amidst the moldy blankets and scattered trash, he saw something else. Piles of it. Modern, clinical waste. Syringes still in their sterile packaging. Empty IV bags. Red plastic biohazard disposal containers. And dozens of small, empty glass vials. He picked one up. Printed on the label was a stylized letter, V, and two words that made the blood freeze in his veins. Veridian Genetics. The name from the church. Alara es Veridian kin. It was all real. It was all happening now. A floorboard creaked in the darkness behind him. Alistair's heart hammered against his ribs. He spun around, shining the light into the corners of the room. Nothing. Just shadows. He didn't wait to investigate. He scrambled out of the cottage, a primal fear overriding all academic curiosity, and ran to his car. He fumbled with the keys, jammed one into the ignition, and turned it. Click. Nothing. He tried again. The metallic click was the only sound, final and absolute. The engine was dead. He pulled out his phone to call for help. A single damning phrase glowed on the screen. No signal. He was stranded, lured into a trap. The woods around him were a wall of impenetrable blackness, and the silence he'd felt in the village was now here, in the dark, heavy and hungry. The historian had become part of the story, and he was terrifyingly, hopelessly alone. Panic is a poor navigator. Alistair stumbled through the woods, branches whipping at his face, his city shoes slipping on the damp soil. His only guide was the dwindling light from his phone, its battery indicator glowing a malevolent red. Every rustle of leaves was a footstep, every shadow a pursuer. The cold night air burned in his lungs. He was an academic, a man whose life was spent in the quiet, orderly world of libraries and archives. Here, in the primal dark, his intellect was useless, a forgotten language. All that was left was the frantic animal beat of his own heart. A twig snapped nearby. The sound was sharp, deliberate, and impossibly close. He froze, his body rigid with adrenaline. He swept the phone's weak beam in an arc through the trees, the light catching on the damp, mossy bark of ancient oaks. And then, for a fraction of a second, the light found something else. A face. It was the face of a child, no older than the girl in the photograph, peeking from behind a tree trunk. The skin was pale, and even in the thin, bluish light of the phone, it was undeniably green. The eyes were huge and dark, and they held no malice, no supernatural threat. They held only fear, a mirror of his own. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the face was gone, vanishing into the darkness as if it had never been. Alistair stood trembling, his breath fogging in the air. The world tilted on its axis, an anecdote from a 12th century chronicler, a blurry photo in an email, a redacted paper. They were all abstract pieces of a puzzle. This was different. This was real. This was a child. The objective, rational scholar had just seen a ghost, and his entire conception of reality lay in shattered pieces at his feet. He didn't think, he ran. He crashed through the undergrowth, heedless of the branches that tore at his clothes, his flight fueled by a terror so profound it felt like a religious conversion. His only destination, his only possible sanctuary, was Alara's cottage. He hammered on her door, his knuckles raw. When she finally opened it, her face a mixture of sleep and irritation, his appearance silenced whatever rebuke was on her lips. He was a mess, mud-stained, bleeding from a scratch on his cheek, his eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged light. "I saw her," he gasped, stumbling into her warm, cluttered living room. In the woods, the girl, the green skin, it's real. And the cottage, the vials, the logo, Veridian Genetics. Seeing his genuine, abject terror, the last of Alara's defenses crumbled. This wasn't the arrogant academic from the village green. This was a man who had looked into the abyss, She sat him down, put a cup of scalding tea into his trembling hands, and finally told him the whole story. The de Calne family never left, she began, her voice a low, somber current. They just changed their name. Sometime in the last century, they became Veridian Genetics. But their role here, that has never changed. They are still the lords of this land, and we are still their serfs. She explained that the green sickness was a real and dangerous genetic disorder, a recessive trait that had been concentrated in a few local families for centuries. She called it the Veridian Anomaly. Veridian provides the treatment, she said, her eyes fixed on a point in the dark past. They developed it themselves. It suppresses the worst of the symptoms, allows the children to live something resembling a normal life. But their care is not charity. It is a cage. In return, they demand absolute secrecy, absolute control. They monitor everyone, everything. This whole community, doctor, is their private, multi-generational clinical trial. They aren't preserving a people, they're curating a resource. Alistair listened, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The folklore was a cage, a story told to keep the victims isolated and the outside world from looking too closely. Science and corporate power were merely the new bars on that cage. A new fire burned through his fear. Rage. They can't get away with this, he said, his voice hard. I need proof, real proof. Alara looked terrified. They'll kill you. They'll kill these people if they're left in the dark, he countered. Alara, I need a way to get evidence. She hesitated for a long time, the internal war plain on her face. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, she scribbled something on a piece of paper. The clinic, it's the nerve center, but it's locked down tight. She pushed the paper towards him. On it was a single word and a number, DeCal 154. That's the master password. It was the year the first de Calne was granted these lands. They're arrogant. They hide in plain sight. Armed with the password, Alistair moved through the sleeping village like a wraith. The Veridian clinic was a small modern cube of glass and steel, dropped incongruously among the timber-framed houses. He slipped around the back, broke a small window, and slid inside. The air was sterile, cold, and unnervingly silent. He found the main office and sat at the computer, the password Alara had given him glowing on the screen. He typed it in. De Calne. Or access granted. He bypassed the patient files, his hands shaking slightly. He was looking for the source, the research itself. He found a partition on the server labeled simply Project Legacy. He clicked it. The screen filled with folders whose names made his blood run cold. Asset viability, cellular regeneration pathways, off-target expression analysis. This wasn't tea medicine. It was product development. He was no longer just a folklorist, he was a corporate spy. He found a thumb drive in a desk drawer and began frantically copying the most damning files. He had to get out, to get this to the world. His eye caught one file name, Trial Subject 7, Wound, test.mp4. He clicked it. A video opened. It showed a sterile room. A man's arm was held fast in a clamp. A machine made a deep, clean laceration across the forearm. It was brutal, clinical. Then, the video's timestamp began to accelerate, fast-forwarding through hours in seconds. Before his eyes, the wound knitted itself shut. The skin closed over, leaving no inflammation, no puckering, no scar. It was a scientific miracle, an impossibility. Then, a new sound cut through the silence of the clinic. A soft, insistent chime, repeating every 2 seconds, a silent alarm. The lights in the office flickered on. The computer screen blinked, and the video file was replaced by a new window. A live video feed from a camera somewhere inside the building. A man's face stared out at him. He was in his 50s, with an impeccably tailored suit and an air of cold, absolute charisma. His expression wasn't one of anger, but of deep, weary disappointment, the look of a king discovering a peasant in the royal treasury. "Dr. Finch," the man said, his voice calm and clear through the computer's speakers. "You are looking at my family's legacy, and you are trespassing." Julian de Calne's voice, smooth as polished glass and cold as a tomb, echoed in the silent clinic. For a heartbeat, Alistair was frozen, pinned by the calm, proprietary gaze, staring out from the monitor. Then, instinct took over. The intellectual, the researcher, the man who believed in process and order, vanished. In his place was a cornered animal. He snatched the thumb drive from the USB port, shoved a chair with a loud scrape against the floor, and hurled it through the plate glass window. The shattering explosion of sound was his starting pistol. He scrambled through the jagged frame, cutting his hands on the shards, and bolted into the village night. He didn't look back, but he heard the immediate, guttural roar of engines. Two dark SUVs, their lights off, peeled away from a side street, their tires squealing on the asphalt. Their headlights flared to life, sweeping across the village and catching him in their glare. He ran. Not like a hero in a film, but clumsily, his lungs on fire, his dress shoes slipping on the damp cobblestones. He plunged off the road and back into the one place that offered any cover, the dark, tangled woods that had terrified him only hours before. Now, they were his only refuge. Every rustle of a branch, every snap of a twig was no longer a phantom, but the very real sound of pursuit. The organized academic was gone, replaced by a desperate fugitive, clutching a tiny piece of plastic that held an entire history of sin. He ran until his legs were jelly, and his breath was a ragged sob. He stumbled into a small clearing, his body giving out, and collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. He was lost, exhausted, and he knew they were closing in. He heard them now, moving with professional quiet through the undergrowth. A beam from a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness, pinning him against the tree trunk. A large man in dark tactical gear stepped into the clearing, a grim look on his face. "It's over," the guard said, advancing on him. "Mr. de Calne wants to talk to you." Alistair had nothing left. As the guard reached for him, a blur of motion exploded from the shadows to his left. A figure, moving with a speed that seemed impossible, slammed into the guard's side. The man grunted in surprise and stumbled, and the figure used the momentum to throw him hard against a tree. The guard slumped to the ground, stunned. The rescuer turned to Alistair. It was a young man in his early 20s. His face pale, and his skin carrying the same faint greenish tint as the child from the woods. It was a face Alistair felt he already knew. "You make a lot of noise for a scholar," the young man said, his voice quiet but steady. He pulled Alistair to his feet. "Come on, they'll have more men here in minutes." He turned and plunged back into the woods, but not randomly. He pulled aside a curtain of thick ivy, revealing a narrow path that was completely invisible before. "My name is Finn," he said over his shoulder, not waiting for a reply. "Try to keep up." Finn led him through a winding network of hidden trails for what felt like miles, moving with a tireless, preternatural grace. Finally, they arrived at a small, hidden settlement, a handful of simple, well-kept houses nestled in a hollow so deep within the woods, it felt like a different country. Lights glowed warmly in the windows. This was the home of the Veridian kin. They were not monsters, they were a community. Inside one of the small homes, the full weight of the truth descended upon Alistair. Several families gathered, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and a desperate, defiant hope. They showed him the price of Veridian's care. An older man rolled up his sleeve to show a grid of small, circular scars on his forearm from decades of painless biopsies. A mother spoke in a hushed, broken voice about her youngest child, who had been taken to a Veridian facility on the mainland for special treatment, and whom she hadn't seen in 6 months. They lived under constant surveillance, with cameras hidden in the trees and Veridian employees making weekly health checks. They were trapped. The disease, if left untreated, was debilitating, often fatal. But the cure, the treatment provided by their so-called benefactor, was devouring them, body and soul. Alistair, the academic who had once coolly dissected their legend from a sterile distance, was now sitting in the heart of it, face to face with the profound human cost. His scientific curiosity had evaporated, replaced by a deep, burning moral outrage. These were not subjects, they were people. The quiet commune was shattered at dawn. The sound of vehicles approaching sent a ripple of panic through the settlement. Alistair and Finn, who had been hiding in a large, dilapidated barn on the edge of the clearing, watched as the same dark SUVs formed a perimeter. The doors opened, and a dozen security guards fanned out, weapons held ready. Then, another car, a sleek black sedan, pulled up. Julian de Calne emerged, dressed in a sharp suit that seemed immune to the morning dew. The rising sun backlit him, casting him in silhouette, a figure of immense and terrible authority. He didn't shout or issue commands. He walked calmly toward the barn and stopped, his eyes fixed on Finn. "Finn," he said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet morning air. It was the voice of a disappointed father. "After all I have done for you, for all of you, is this how you repay my family's legacy?" He then turned his gaze to Alistair, who was visible in the shadows of the barn door. "And you, Doctor, the historian, you see all of this as exploitation. I see it as salvation. The sacrifices made here, the data we have gathered, will lead to cures for thousands of diseases. It will save millions of lives. What is the suffering of a few hundred when weighed against the good of all humanity?" He took a step closer, his offer as smooth and chilling as his voice. "Join me. You will not be a trespasser, but an honored chronicler. You will be the man who documents the single greatest medical breakthrough in human history." He gave a thin, cold smile. "History is written by the victors, Doctor. Don't choose the losing side." Alistair looked from Julian de Calne's chillingly reasonable face to Finn E.S., which was set like stone. There was no choice to be made. "History is also written by the survivors, Mr. de Calne," Alistair said, his voice shaking but clear. "And you've mistaken these people for victims. They re-not." It was all the signal Finn needed. He kicked over a stack of old barrels, creating a momentary diversion, and the two of them bolted through the dilapidated back wall of the barn, plunging once more into the woods. "Spread out! Get them!" De Calne's furious roar echoed behind them. But this time, Alistair wasn't just running, he was fighting back. The folklorist had become a strategist. "Finn, do you know the Whispering Hollow, west of here?" he yelled over the sound of their own running feet. Finn nodded. "The old stories say a phantom pack of hounds hunts there. The guards are local. They'll have grown up on that terror." As Finn peeled off to create a cacophony of howling noises from the direction of the hollow, Alistair pulled out a cheap burner phone he'd bought in the village. He found a spot where the trees thinned, revealing the de Calne Manor on the hill, a communications tower rising from its roof like a spear. He jammed the thumb drive into a dongle connected to the phone. The signal was weak, just one flickering bar. He selected all the files, the research, the financial records, the horrific video of the wound test, and hit upload. A progress bar appeared, moving with agonizing slowness. C. 1. While Finn led the guards on a ghost chase through their own superstitions, Alistair fought a second, silent battle, pushing gigabytes of truth through a straw S-worth of signal. He knew it wasn't enough. They had to stop de Calne himself. They regrouped, and using the chaos Finn had created, slipped onto the manor grounds. They found a service entrance to the sub-level and descended from the ancient stone of the manor into the cold, sterile steel of the laboratory. Julian de Calne was there, standing before a bank of monitors, his composure finally cracking. He was no longer a calm ideologue, but a furious tyrant, watching his empire crumble. "It took my family 900 years to build this legacy, he hissed as Alistair stepped out of the shadows. To cultivate this gift? You think I'll let a meddling academic and a handful of ungrateful subjects undo it all? Alistair tried to appeal to him one last time. This isn't a legacy, it's a prison. Let these people go. De Calne laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Go where? I am the only one on Earth who can manage their condition. Releasing them is a death sentence. He turned to a console and slammed his hand down on a large red button. A klaxon blared. On the main monitor, a 5-minute countdown began. Sterilization protocol initiated. But you were right, De Calne said with a terrifying smile. It is a prison, and the warden is burning it to the ground. Vents in the ceiling hissed open, releasing a thick, acrid gas. This will wipe the servers, the samples, everything, Julian explained, his voice laced with manic pride. It's also an airborne chemical agent designed to neutralize the anomaly. It will seep into the ground, into the aquifer. It won't kill them, Doctor. It will just cure them. It will take away the one thing that makes them special. I will erase my great failure. As De Calne gloated, Finn was already moving. Alistair lunged for the console, a desperate attempt to distract the man, but Julian shoved him aside. While they scuffled, Finn sprinted toward the server room at the far end of the lab, where the manual override for the protocol was located. The poison gas was thicker there, and he began to cough, his enhanced biology reacting violently to the chemical agent. Heavy security doors began to slide shut, sealing off the sections. Finn didn't hesitate. He used his unnatural speed to slide under one door just as it closed. He leapt over a barricade of equipment, his body a blur of motion. He was in agony, his skin flushing a painful dark shade of green, but he pushed through. With 10 seconds left on the clock, he reached the override panel. It was shielded by a thick polycarbonate cover. He didn't waste time trying to open it. He drew back his fist and punched through the cover with a sickening crack, his knuckles shattering in the process. He slammed his bloody hand onto the override button. The klaxon died. The vents hissed shut. The countdown vanished. Finn slumped against the wall, wounded but triumphant, having used the very gift De Calne sought to exploit to save his people from him. The first thing Alistair heard when he emerged from the manor was the sound of sirens. The data upload had completed. The world had arrived. Police cars and news vans swarmed the gilded gates of the De Calne estate. Veridian security guards were surrendering, dropping their weapons on the manicured lawn. Alistair stood beside Ilara, giving a statement to a reporter. He wasn't triumphant. He was somber, exhausted. He spoke carefully, choosing his words not for sensationalism, but for protection. He didn't speak of green-skinned children from another world. He spoke of a vulnerable, isolated community and the horrors of corporate abuse and medical exploitation. Across the lawn, Finn, his hand crudely bandaged, stood with his family. They blinked in the sudden, harsh glare of the camera lights, their long, 900-year-old secret finally over. They were free, but they were also exposed. Strangers in a world they had only ever watched from the shadows. Months later, Alistair stood at the same lectern, in front of the same crude illustration of the Green Children. This time, the lecture hall was packed. Every seat was filled, with students spilling into the aisles. "We have always told stories to explain the things we don't understand," he began, his voice different now, stripped of its easy academic certainty. "We tell tales of ghosts and monsters and children from other worlds. And for most of my life, I believed my job was to explain those stories away, to find the mundane truth hidden beneath the fantastical lie." He looked out at the sea of faces. I was wrong. My job, our job, is to listen. The story of the Green Children of Woolpit was never about malnutrition. It was about isolation. It was about exploitation. It was a testimony passed down through generations from a community that had no other way to speak. He clicked the remote. The ancient illustration was replaced by a modern photo, a picture of Finn and his family, standing on the lawn of their settlement, their faces uncertain but their own. Sometimes, Alistair concluded, his voice ringing with the weight of hard-won conviction, a legend is not a fantasy to be debunked. It is a map, left for us by the victims, and it is our duty to learn how to read it. It is always so satisfying when science can step in and neatly debunk an old ghost story. At the beginning of this story, Dr. Finch does just that, turning the eerie legend of the Green Children into a simple, understandable case of malnutrition. The mystery is solved. The book is closed. But what is so fascinating here is how the story peels back that neat explanation to reveal something far more complex. The legend, the superstition, wasn't the lie. It was a distorted echo of the truth. For centuries, the tale of strange, otherworldly children wasn't just a spooky story. It was a form of protection. It was a keep-out sign written in the language of myth, guarding a terrible secret and a vulnerable community. The real monster wasn't a goblin or an alien, but a corporation hiding behind the very mask of science and progress. The cold, rational explanation, while technically correct, was completely blind to the human tragedy at the story's heart. In trying to debunk the myth, our hero almost missed the truth entirely. It suggests that sometimes, the stories we tell, the superstitions we cling to, have a deeper purpose. They can be a culture's way of remembering a pain that has no other voice. It leaves me thinking about what we value more, a comfortable, scientific answer, or the messier, more complicated truth a legend might be trying to preserve.